In September 2015, in Idaho's Birch Creek Valley, a risky decision took place. An old rancher named Jay Wild released 9 wild beavers, along with a structure of wooden posts, into a stream that was drying up. Immediately, controversy erupted. The local community and fisheries managers strongly opposed the move. They warned that dams made of branches would create deadly barriers, block migration routes, and completely wipe out the last native trout population. But the results after 4 years shattered every prediction. The number of Bonneville cutthroat trout did not disappear. It exploded 50-fold. The stream that once trickled dry in the hot season now maintained continuous flow 365 days a year. This 50-fold growth shocked the field of hydrology. Why could a structure woven from dry branches and mud, something once considered the most dangerous barrier for fish, create a spawning environment with the highest trout density in the American West? The explosion at Birch Creek was not a random phenomenon. It was real-world evidence exposing a misunderstanding that had lasted for more than 150 years in water resource management. To decode the principle behind this record number, the root of the problem must be traced back to before human intervention began. Before the 17th century, North American rivers looked completely different from today. This continent was once home to 60 million to 400 million beavers. The streams of that era were not narrow, fast-flowing channels. River networks spread into shallow, winding wet zones connected by countless natural dams. In that environment, trout and beavers co-evolved for millions of years. Trout did not decline because of beaver dams. On the contrary, the still waters created by those dams were the ideal nursery habitat. They provided abundant food, helped young fish escape powerful flood currents, and protected them from large predators. The entire natural hydrological system operated stably and maintained peak biological density throughout history. And let us pause for a moment. Honestly, many people believe that human life and the local economy must always be placed above the lives of wild animals. Do you agree with that view? This ecological balance began to collapse when commercial exploitation exploded. Rising demand for fur triggered large-scale trapping campaigns. In less than 2 centuries, hundreds of millions of beavers were removed from river basins. Immediately after the beavers disappeared, agriculture and livestock expanded. To fully exploit floodplain land, humans brought in machines to straighten winding streams, flatten wetlands, and reinforce banks with riprap. The engineering mindset of the time assumed that an optimal river had to be a straight water channel, with fast flow and no obstacles. Authorities even classified beavers as infrastructure pests. Every wooden dam that appeared in a stream was destroyed by machinery. Humans believed that concreting rivers and removing obstacles would optimize water resources. But the complete removal of beavers pulled out the central link of ARF, the hydrological system, setting off a chain of widespread degradation soon afterward. Removing more than 99.9% of the beaver population did not create perfect rivers. It triggered a chain reaction that devastated the entire landscape. Without wooden dams to deflect and slow the current, the energy of rainwater gathered into a sharp blade. Water roared forward, cutting straight down into the streambed. Geologists call this phenomenon stream incision. Within only a few decades, stream beds in Idaho were carved 2 to 4 meters deeper, tearing the ground open into bare V-shaped trenches. When the stream bed suddenly dropped, it acted like a giant drain, pulling the entire valley's groundwater table down with it. The lush floodplains on both banks disappeared completely, replaced by cracked earth and dry shrubs. To rescue this erosion disaster, state governments across the United States entered an expensive budget crisis. They poured more than $1.5 billion of taxpayer money into riprap bank projects and artificial concrete dams, but this was the greatest engineering deception of the century. Rigid concrete blocks cannot flex with seasonal floods. Rainwater was compressed and tore open the base of the embankments, washing away million-dollar structures after only 2 or 3 major flood seasons. Authorities fell into a dead-end loop. The more money they spent building artificial dams, the more violently streams eroded and the faster trout disappeared. At Birch Creek, the headwater flow vanished after only a few short weeks of summer. The stream was clinically dead, and with the disappearance of water, the Bonneville cutthroat trout population plunged without control, reaching the edge of extinction across the entire basin. Facing the disastrous decline of fish species, 20th-century fisheries management reached a quick conclusion: beaver dams were the culprit. This view came from a pipeline engineering mindset. Experts at the time believed that a dam made of branches and mud was a sealed wall. They thought it completely blocked the upstream swimming route of trout towards spawning grounds, trapping the fish and weakening them. On paper, that argument sounded extremely logical, but it was based on one fatal mistake: treating a natural biological structure as if it were an artificial concrete dam. A concrete dam is an absolute barrier. A beaver dam is not. Beaver dams are leaky structures. Water still slips through thousands of openings beneath and around the body of the dam. More importantly, the pipeline engineering mindset completely ignored the natural barrier crossing ability of trout creatures that had lived alongside beavers for millions of years before humans appeared. This mistaken blame trapped Birch Creek in silent death for 2 decades, until a completely opposite solution appeared. In 2015, facing the risk that his ranch would collapse from lack of water, Jay Wild decided not to wait for the government's concrete-based projects. He turned to 2 hydrology researchers, Dr. Joe Wheaton and Nick Bowes from Utah State University. They did not bring expensive reservoir dam blueprints. What they deployed was a completely new method: BDA bait dams, or beaver dam analogs. The way they worked was extremely simple and cheap. They drove wooden posts into the incised streambed, wove fresh willow branches back and forth between the posts, then packed a little mud and soil around the base. Each structure cost less than a few $dozen. The goal of a BDA was not to fully replace a natural dam. It worked as a bait blueprint. The BDA slowed the current just enough for sediment to settle, raised the streambed, and created a safe environment to attract wild beavers back to take over. It was a bet on nature's ability to repair itself. The combination of BDA bait dams and beavers activated an extremely effective hydrological mechanism, summarized in the 3S principle: slow, spread, store. First, the wooden dam forced the rushing water to slow down. The energy of the current was weakened. Suspended sediment in the water settled to the bottom, gradually filling the V-shaped incised channels. Next, as the streambed rose, water spilled over both banks and spread across the dry floodplains. The narrow, deeply cut stream became a living network of shallow ponds and wetlands. Finally, this overbank water did not simply flow away. It soaked deep into the soil layers below, turning the entire valley into a giant groundwater storing sponge. During the dry summer, that groundwater seeped back into the streambed, maintaining continuous flow. And the greatest secret behind the trout explosion lay in the structure of these ponds. When floodwater passed over the BDA dams, it created low water steps, allowing trout to easily jump across or swim through the openings underneath. The calm shallow ponds became massive food factories. The density of insect larvae and small crustaceans increased dozens of times. Young trout living in beaver ponds were not blocked at all. They grew 30% faster than trout living in ordinary straight stream sections. The results at Birch Creek surpassed every optimistic scenario the research team had imagined. From the original 26 BD bait dams installed by humans, the released beavers took over the work. They worked continuously without rest, expanding the system by themselves into more than 200 natural dams covering the entire valley. The stream that once dried down to bare cobbles by June now maintained continuous flow 365 days a year. The groundwater table on both banks rose by nearly 1 meter, turning cracked land into a lush green corridor overflowing with life. And the biggest explosion happened in the density of Bonneville cutthroat trout. From a bottom-level number of fewer than 3 fish per 100 meters of stream, field surveys recorded a historic figure 153 fish per 100 meters. The trout population did not only explode 50-fold in number, the average weight and size of juvenile fish also became far superior. The experimental project, costing only $3,000, poured cold water on million-dollar concrete projects. The evidence was clear. Beaver dams were not killing trout, they were the only key to bringing them back. But the story did not stop at a perfect victory. When scientists dug deeper into the research, they discovered the complex hidden sides of nature, where a wrong intervention could turn the result into disaster. Beavers are not a universal miracle cure. In some shallow water areas at the peak of summer, the still ponds created by beaver dams absorb too much solar heat. Water temperatures can rise close to the tolerance limit of cold water fish species. At the same time, the buildup of decomposing organic vegetation in the oxygen-poor environment at the bottom of ponds increases local methane emissions. Even more serious is the risk of chain dam failure. If beavers are released into stream beds that have been incised too deeply and have flood currents that are too powerful, without strong enough BD bait dams to support them, the natural wooden dams can collapse. Thousands of cubic meters of mud and sediment, accumulated behind the dams, could be suddenly flushed downstream, burying entire trout spawning beds, and wiping out every ecological gain in just a few hours. The challenge from nature was only half the battle. The greatest threat to this recovery project came from human society itself. When water levels in Birch Creek rose, a fierce legal battle erupted around water rights, one of the most sensitive issues in the American West. Downstream ranch owners filed lawsuits. They accused the beaver dams of stealing their water and reducing the flow reaching irrigation canals that had been legally permitted. The conflict did not remain only on legal documents. It became a tense field battle. For many nights, bounty hunters secretly entered the Birch Creek area, set steel traps, and used guns to kill the recently released beavers. Even the state transportation agency sent excavators to flatten the BDA bait dams, citing the risk of overflowing water causing highway slope failures. Jay Wild and the research team had to take turns standing guard to protect each wooden post, while facing the risk of heavy fines and the loss of ranch land use permits. At the same time, infrastructure and real estate companies saw beavers as a direct threat. These rodents cut down landscape trees, damaged levees, caused water to flood basements, and clogged drainage systems along highways. In many states, the law still treated beaver relocation as a violation, and even required shooting or trapping them as soon as residents reported flooding. A heated clash unfolded between scientists and conservationists who wanted to expand the model, and an old legal system built to protect human property and infrastructure. Despite the unresolved legal controversies, the ripple effects of the beaver dams at Birch Creek created an ecological horizon far wider than expected. The latest research from Dr. Emily Fairfax proved a shocking phenomenon: the smoky beaver effect. During major wildfires sweeping across the American West, while surrounding forests burned to ash, valleys with beaver dams maintained perfect strips of green. The high moisture from the ponds and wetlands turned these places into fortresses against wildfire, becoming vital refuges for countless wild animals. And it did not stop there. The bottoms of beaver ponds acted like giant carbon traps. Mud sediments buried thousands of tons of organic material underground, preventing carbon from escaping back into the atmosphere for hundreds of years. The return of water and shrubs brought back a long chain of living creatures, migratory birds, deer, amphibians, and native insects. Restoring one small rodent link had healed the entire living network of a vast region. The success of the $0 biotechnology at Birch Creek was not a completely new discovery. For North American indigenous peoples such as the Tulalip and the Blackfeet, it was simply a confirmation of a truth their ancestors had known for thousands of years. The shift from America to Europe sends one powerful message: whether in developing countries or leading technological powers, the problem of climate change and drought will never find its answer at the bottom of lifeless concrete blocks. In indigenous culture, beavers were never seen as pests or obstacles. They were called waterway brothers, guardians of rivers during drought. Traditional knowledge understood clearly that wherever there were beaver dams, the water would never run dry and trout would always return. Modern Western science spent more than a century and billions of dollars on failed concrete structures, only to arrive at a conclusion indigenous people had passed down for generations. This recognition marked an important shift in thinking, moving from the attitude of dominating and reshaping nature to listening and cooperating with indigenous knowledge to heal the planet. The success of Birch Creek did not stop at one private ranch. By 2026, the U.S. government and many West Coast states had officially included the Beaver Dam Analog, or BDA, model in national climate change response action plans. The bulldozers that once flattened beaver dams are now being replaced by direct funding programs that help farmers coexist with this wild engineer. The United States Department of Agriculture and Fisheries Management agencies have officially included low-tech process-based restoration, or LTPBR, in national technical guidance documents. The BDA method, once dismissed as a crazy joke, has now become the gold standard in watershed restoration projects. In California and Washington, legal regulations have begun to change. State budgets that once paid for trapping and killing beavers are now being redirected toward relocation, protection, and resettlement support programs for this species. From a fierce conflict of interests, beavers have become strategic allies of governments in the large-scale fight against drought and climate change. The idea of listening to wild engineers from Birch Creek Valley is no longer only an American story. It is igniting an ecological revolution around the world, especially in Europe, a region long known for its concrete-based water control mindset. In England, a country where beavers had been completely extinct for 400 years because of hunting, the government had to quietly reintroduce this species into river basins in Devon and Scotland. The results were just as striking. Flash floods that once devastated thousands of downstream households saw peak flow reduced by up to 30%, thanks to beaver dam systems holding water upstream. Meanwhile, the Netherlands, the world's master of water control, with billion-euro concrete sea defenses, is also shifting its strategy toward rewilding, returning floodplains to rivers, and giving space back to nature so it can regulate itself, instead of trying to control water flow entirely with artificial technology. Back at Birch Creek today, water still murmurs through more than 200 wooden dams. Beneath the clear current, schools of Bonneville cutthroat trout flick their tails and swim upstream, multiplying strongly in a valley that was once exhausted. The story here has proven a deep ecological law: nature does not need complicated or expensive concrete solutions from humans in order to recover. The only thing nature needs is for us to recognize our mistakes, step back from brutal interventions, and return space to true wild engineers so they can do their work. When humans learn to let go of control, life will find its own way back. Nature does not need humans to save it. Nature only needs humans to interfere less violently. If you agree with this view, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next ecological investigation.